A glue stick, the yellow pages. What else came up in the conversation? We're going to talk about the single biggest lesson from a 40-year career building Michigan's largest portfolio of self storage. Welcome to the Stories Behind the Door podcast. This week, it's the president of the Pogoda Companies, Maurice Pogoda. I'm so excited to have Maurice Pogoda sitting down with me. First and foremost, I want to welcome you back. We had to delay getting him on the show for a little bit because he had a pretty cool trip laid out. So welcome back. I know you were over in Europe for a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you. I am glad to be back in a place where it is relatively cool.
Yeah, I can't say that on my end. I'm in New Jersey and we're in the midst of a ridiculous heat wave, but you're in Michigan and known for amazing summers, of course. So excited to be
Yeah.
back in your home climate. We're going to get to all of that. I'll talk a little. We can maybe cover a little bit of your trip to Italy if we get to that point, but definitely want to discuss Michigan. And I start the podcast always the same way, Maurice, which is I want to hear how people got involved. And I've heard this story through the back channel through your son, Michael, but want you to tell me a little bit about your journey into self-storage and what got Maurice Pogoda into this amazing industry that we're in.
Oh, okay. I'll try to give you the quick version.
I don't need the quick version. I like the long version. This is a great story, so I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Well, basically, I kind of fortunately stumbled into it, is what it comes down to. Look, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a Brooklyn boy through and through. I don't think you can ever take that out of me. But went off to college when I was 17. I was a little bit, I was one of the younger guys in the class. Went to University of Pennsylvania. Had a great 4 years, understanding that this was the early 1970s, a very, very different time. Very different time with respect to the way people, I think, treated education.
Yeah.
I was there not to necessarily treat it as a place to find an occupation. I was actually there to, sort of expand my mind, and I was a history and English major, so I was reading hundreds of pages almost literally every single day. And when I graduated, there was no plan. So took a few years off. I had some wonderful jobs. I was a personal trainer at a club for a while. I waited a lot of tables, which was great. It gave some quick cash to pay the rent, and moved to Charleston, South Carolina for a year and a half on a whim. And as I've told other people the story before, I was having probably too good a time. And so at some point in my journey there, I sort of thought, this is not where I want my life to be. I definitely want more than waiting tables and going to clubs at night. So I decided to go to business school, went to the University of Michigan, one of the couple of schools that I applied to. The other was NYU. Frankly, I didn't really want to go back to New York. So I went to University of Michigan, and I was fortunate within the first few months to meet my future wife. And it's hard for me to say, but we've known each other 45 years
Oof.
now. So, and still going strong.
Love it.
And, I was a marketing guy, which kind of was in line with my previous history and English. They all kind of fall in line together.
Yeah.
But I also took finance courses and got out, worked at Lever Brothers in New York as a brand manager for 3 years, and got married after a year. So late 1983, or I should say Memorial Day 1983. And, after a little while in the corporate America, I realized it wasn't my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I really didn't necessarily want to be in New York. As much fun as it was, a little too crowded for me. And that's sort of been like the theme from then on, try to find some peace and quiet, and found an opportunity in Michigan with my wife's family in real estate. So I started there, and then got exposed to self-storage and decided, as a marketer, this was my niche. And I started as a broker and was the only broker in Michigan. This was long before the Marcus and Millichaps and the Skyviews and all these what I would call Johnny come latelys, because they came much later. And I frankly owned Michigan. There was no one else there, and there was a real nice pent up demand. And long story short, I was exposed to self storage. Went to my first SSA, which at the time was the SSSA, Self Service Storage Association.
Nice.
Got to SSA in 1986,
Wow.
and kind of started exploring the industry. As I said, founded my niche in it, and started the company with my wife in late 1987, and that's kind of was the journey, and it was a
Uh,
great time to be in it because it's not the way it is now.
no.
It was really underformed. It was new. It was in the early phases of its life cycle, and there was plenty of opportunity, though it took a few years to start getting into those other opportunities.
What an amazing story. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I also have an English and history degree. I'm a little salty because UPenn was my dream school, and I listened to a college advisor tell me I shouldn't apply. I did go to Tufts, which is not a terrible school in any way, shape, or form, so I did all right. But fellow English and history major working in self storage here, which is pretty neat because about as far removed from self storage as you could possibly be. That was cool. I want to dive into this, right? So it's the 1980s. You decide to go start a self storage. I'm actually looking out my window at a U-Haul that sits across the street from me. But very different product in the 1980s than what we kind of maybe think of as storage now. We're seeing the multi-story deals go up and climate control everything. And tell me a little bit about what a typical self-storage facility looked like in the 1980s when you're doing brokerage and eventually decide to start, acquiring assets and starting the Pagoda companies.
Really, it was just your typical drive up. I mean, yes, there was some older product than that really truly first generation 1970s product, but early to mid 80s is when most of that, I don't know if it's first, second generation, whatever, got built. And it's really wasn't much different. I mean, the difference was you had mom and pop owners, which you still have, but you had resident managers. There was always a place to
Yeah.
live at every storage facility.
Yeah.
We called it mini warehouse. Then it became mini storage. Then it became self storage, and who knows what we call it now. Now we just call it storage. But it was really it wasn't until mid 90s that the multi-story really started popping up, and it didn't pop up in Michigan. I mean, I built the first multi-story
Love it.
self-storage on 8 Mile Road, which most people know from the Eminem movie, is the border between the suburbs and Detroit. And I built it on the Southfield side in 1999. And
Wow.
that was first ground up multi-story, and everything before that was just your basic drive up. And frankly, it was doing very well. There was no outlet for people to sell. Maybe you'd have your Remax guy or Century 21 broker that, like then, like today, doesn't know anything about storage. We're really qualified. And I came in as someone that studied the industry. I mean, I started going in 86, but besides COVID, I'm not sure that I've ever missed an SSA show.
Wow.
And besides that, I was also going to ISS shows.
Yeah.
So I was going to 4 shows a year. I was going to Vegas twice a year, and wherever, whether it was New Orleans or Charlotte or wherever it was, I was going to the other shows.
Yeah. Love it.
So, it just was it was an unknown quantity. I tell people what I was doing, and they would say, What? You're in storage?"
Yeah.
And in our market, we had a chain called Your Attic, which was the first really chain, before SureGuard and all the others. And I'd say, like that Your Attic on Haggerty Road. I said, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I sell those and overtime managed and overtime bought them.
So I have a few questions that I want to ask you right now. One of them is about your family. You talked very specifically about how you started the company with your wife, which I thought was very telling. And I want to talk to you about your family anyway, because it's something I have tremendous admiration for you about. But before we go into that, I want to pick your brain about what was it about self-storage when you first got into it? Because you didn't move to Michigan and get into real estate with her family with the intent of being in storage. What was it about storage that kind of drew you to it as an asset?
Well, it's kind of funny that I came to get in business with my father-in-law. And my father-in-law was a very successful builder who, when I came, was really involved in industrial. I mean, he built multifamily, he built office, and then, after a couple weeks, I kind of realized that one, I didn't know anything about real estate, and my father-in-law sort of expected, go talk to the architect about this, go talk to so and so about. I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Like I kind of realized that I needed more education. And so I ended up getting a job with an income property brokerage company that sold, and I ended up selling as a sales agent and eventually became a broker. I ended up selling office, retail, and multifamily. And when I came across self-storage, it was so unknown, and my marketing background, the thing that you always try to find is what's the different thing that's out there. What's the niche that you can own? And that's really what was so enticing, and also frankly the ease of it.
Yeah.
There was no competition doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
Today you want to go in and you want to start a brokerage. Who are you competing against? You want to build self-storage. I mean, now we talk, 6, 7, 8, 9. Who knows how many square feet per person, if people even still use that measure.
Yeah.
Back then,
7.9, the latest. I just got that from my friend Steve Ross. 7.9 square foot per capita nationally.
Well, when I finally got into developing, I wouldn't develop if there was more than 2 square feet per.
Wow. Wow.
And if I was going to say my biggest mistake in self-storage was in some of those markets where I built, that I didn't build more.
Yeah.
I said, no, we have squashed all the demand. We've covered it.
Yeah.
And of course, obviously, we know.
Yeah.
So
hindsight's beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what drew me to it, and it was I don't know, it was a little bit like the Wild West then. It was really unexplored and unknown.
I was laughing when you were talking about that, as the only broker for self-storage in Michigan, really. And I had conversations with like 4 different brokers specific to self-storage just this week, right? So there's so many people now that it's no longer really the Wild West. And it's kind of changed drastically how things have operated in the world of acquisitions. You guys have done an amazing job. For people who don't know, you're the largest owner of storage facilities in the state of Michigan, and continue to expand on that. But it's very different today trying to acquire or even develop. Good luck finding a spot where you can find a 3-mile radius with less than 2 square foot per capita anywhere in the United States right now that has any type of population. Tell me a little bit about what it's like operating today, trying to grow the Pogoda companies versus what it was like in the 80s.
Well, first of all, what's so different is that I'm not doing everything myself now.
Love it.
For a long time, it was me.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and yes, my wife was working the administrative side and helping. I mean, back then I just described this, I think to Michael the other day, or to somebody, I described as a broker what my initial brochures were like. Now we PDF everything, and you pull the pictures, you put it in, you create your package. The first thing I did was go out and I had a bank of yellow pages. I mean, every yellow page in the state of Michigan,
Yep.
I got a copy of, and I would go and drive every single storage facility and take pictures of them.
Wow.
And then look up who's the owner, find that through public records or word of mouth or talking to the manager on site. And then to be a broker, I would put together literally on a dot matrix printer the brochure, print them up, and then paste using a glue stick, paste the pictures in the
Brochure.
for each one, and use a little binder to create something that looks somewhat professional. Stick it in the envelope, send it out to people. So that was one very, the world obviously has changed. But in terms of operations, now I'm not a one-man show. We've got about 110, I think, employees at this point. What I would call my boys, who aren't boys anymore,
Yep.
but boys are in the business and in acquisitions and in finance, and well accomplished, very bright, probably pushing me harder out of my comfort zone than I've ever been, because if you want to acquire today, you have to take some chances. And there were always chances that you took, but today you're competing against so many more people.
Yeah.
When I would be looking to buy something, there were, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 other buyers out there, and they were almost all from the state of Michigan.
Yep.
Now who knows where they're coming from? You got that nice group in Florida now that's trying to buy up everything like he's done before, and
Yep.
you got all these other groups that go and say, oh, this area is underserved, but they don't really know the submarkets. That's the problem.
Right.
And fortunately, new construction has slowed down a little bit, but all those things have made the world so much different, more difficult than it was before.
I can speak to that. I got into self-storage in 2021, and the development company that I was working with was building nationally. And quite frankly, in hindsight, probably maybe a little bit too optimistic of the view of what was going on in 21, 22. It's a challenge when you're trying to do things nationally. You've chosen a very different strategy. And, I've spoken, referenced Michael earlier, your son, Michael Pogoda, one of the very first people. He was one of the first 5 people I ever spoke to when I got into this industry. And we'll go down that road. I still got a little bit of time left to cover that ground, but, it's changed. So, when you guys have chosen to stay in Michigan and not go nationally, you've gone to a couple bordering states, but really have chosen to, really concentrate on being able to stay close to everything that you manage. What led to that decision, and how has that helped you guys grow your company?
Well, I think it wasn't as much a decision at one point. Now it's more of a decision.
Yeah.
At one point it was, I knew all the players in Michigan. So when something was available, I would almost be the first call. And I'm saying I, because at that point it really was me. And, over time, as the organization grew, that changed a little bit with other people. But regardless, it was, from a management standpoint, it was a very logical decision. And, there isn't really a market in Michigan, except maybe in the Thumb area, which I don't know very well. If people don't know, this is Michigan.
Yeah, you got it.
So Thumb area,
Far west.
the Thumb area is really relatively underpopulated and just have never gone there. But every other area, if someone said, oh, there's something in Kalamazoo, there's something in Lansing, there's something in XYZ, I knew the areas well enough and had driven them, so I knew them. In contrast to now that we've expanded into Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, that's been a conscious decision to expand because we have 50 or so stores in the state of Michigan, and the old adage about diversity really holds for us as well. And Michigan uh, has really diversified its economy, so it's not just totally dependent on cars.
Yeah.
As it was when I started, the phrase used to be, when the rest of the economy got a cold, Michigan would get pneumonia.
Yeah.
Because we were so car dependent. Fortunately, it's not that way anymore. But still, it only makes sense for us to continue to expand outside of this area. And we've recently bought some in Michigan, but we thought it fit our portfolio very well, and we could get the economies of scale or I should say, increase our economies of scale.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we're really focused out of the state of Michigan now.
Tell me how technology, we talk about, I'm a person at my first job, I used a typewriter, right? So I'm of a certain age where I can write. You were talking about putting a binder together and using a glue stick to do stuff. It resonated with me very well. How has the improvements in technology kind of allowed you folks to maybe be more comfortable expanding into Ohio, into Kentucky, into Indiana?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question because, for the people that are watching, and surely yourself, we used to live and die by the yellow pages.
Yep.
That was how big is the ad? And though our brand name was National Self Storage, then it became National Storage Centers. Now we're just National Storage. But which sort of went against the grain of naming your properties AAA or AAA storage in the yellow pages.
People that grew up with Google don't understand why that existed, right? They see AAA and they don't know why it's called AAA.
Yeah, but that was the reason, because people went to the yellow pages.
Yep.
And either they went in the listings or they looked for what was the biggest ad, and whatever the biggest ad was that you could afford.
Yep.
But then the internet came along, and we all thought that was going to be the great equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
We all thought, oh, now we can compete with, at the time, Public Storage as being the largest.
Yep.
Now we can compete because everybody's competing on the internet. Well, we didn't realize what was going to happen with Google ads and all of that, and buying that. But in terms of technology, it's just helped our processes so much. It helps we're able to access so much more data that we never had. And I think people still talk about the lack of data in storage compared to other commercial real estate types.
Yeah.
You want to know multifamily or retailer, or for me, God forbid, office. I mean, I'm fortunate that I've been very dogmatic and have stuck with what I believed was my niche, which was self-storage.
Yeah.
But it's really helped. It's really helped us be better decision makers. Is what it comes down to. And all of that data that now, whether it's the radiuses of the world and the like, I don't think any of those are perfect by any means, but we use them all at this point.
But it's amazing that you can go into any of 5 different data platforms and literally identify the owner information on a lot of facilities, right? Like you can call up who the owner is with a phone number in many instances, data that certainly didn't exist even 10 years ago that handily. Quite frankly, it's a challenge in storage, right? Because it's the access to that information is so much easier. I think it's kind of allowed more people to come in. You mentioned something earlier I want to talk about. The facilities all had a space for the manager to live, right? We're moving now to this point where not even every facility might always have an on-site manager all the time. How is Hub and Spoke kind of, coming into your world and maybe allowing you to trim operating costs and expand your footprint?
It's funny because I was just had the same conversation in a recent Mini Storage Messenger article about how that has evolved. And I'm not, I don't want to sound, too old school, but there were advantages to having on-site managers.
Mhm.
You always had a couple where one was stronger than the other, and it wasn't necessarily the woman was stronger or the man was stronger, but there was always one that really did was so much better. That was part of the negative, and the negative of, if their place was next door, they're cooking kielbasa next door.
Yeah.
The office wasn't a great place to be. But I we're not totally sold on the remote management. There we used to have a regional manager. He had a big plaque on his desk, and on the plaque it said, "It's the manager, stupid." And whenever there's an issue at any of our stores, my first question, and really everybody's first question is it the manager?
Hmm.
Is the manager burnt out? Has the manager have some personal problems? What's going on? You can make you can make a B location very good with a good manager.
Yep.
You can make an A location very, very, very bad with a bad manager. So, all of that has changed. And, we've gone now from, we used to now put in this beautiful office, with all the boxes lined up all over the place. So you had to trip over them and force people to buy the sundries and the like. We were putting in our new developments, 1,000 square foot offices.
Yep.
Now we're cutting those down to maybe 300-400 square feet,
Yep.
uh, and going the other way, and putting in the kiosks, and we have our in-house call center, but there's still a lot of personal touch in this industry, any industry. I mean,
Yeah.
we all know the difference between going into a store and getting help or not getting help, and the
Yeah.
difference it makes in your experience. The waiter or waitress can make or break your experience.
Yeah.
And I don't think storage is exactly like that, but not having any interaction, some people love that, but there's still a lot of people that need their hand held.
I love that. Doesn't surprise me knowing how successful and how respected you are in our industry that you come from that point of view. A couple people I have tremendous respect for from the operations side, Jesse Lamb and Bo Agnello, who've been on the podcast, echo your sentiments completely, right? Like, let's not forget that ultimately the customers are our livelihood, and there has to be somebody that's facilitating a positive experience for those customers in our stores if we want to have a long-term relationship in the communities we're serving. I'm going to pivot here a little bit because it's hard for me to believe we've been talking for 28 minutes. I want to honor your time. I try and keep this somewhere around 30 minutes. I want to talk about your family. I got exposed to Michael Pogoda 4 years ago. It was one of the very first people I spoke to, as I said, and we were talking about a deal in Ohio that at the time I was selling entitled land. I was so blown away by the way that he carried himself. He's significantly younger than I am, and he's second generation in the business. And say what you want, but there are times when somebody who kind of grew up in something can be a little bit cocky and a little bit off-putting. Your son is the exact opposite of that. I could not imagine somebody being that humble and, quite frankly, being that caring about me and what I was trying to sell him something and he's trying to help me, which I just found to be backstory on this. I spent most of my adult life teaching martial arts. I owned a martial arts school for a dozen years, and a lot of my students were kids. Kids will always show you a lot about who the parents are. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit, having been exposed to your son, what's your secret to raising kids? Because I want to kind of understand it. And, what was the way that you and your wife were able to kind of impart in your son to not only be incredibly intelligent, because he is, but humble and just good people?
Is it okay to say that we beat them daily?
Listen, if that's the secret, I'm going to go get a stick because I think I need one.
Well, it's from one of your recent LinkedIn posts. How you do anything is how you do
I
everything.
love that.
And that was that was sort of our motto.
Hmm.
And being respectful to other people. And fortunately, I've got three grown sons. All three are extremely bright. We have no clunkers in the bunch. Uh, all three have been in the business, and Michael and Daniel are very active and play very, very different roles. But really, they were exposed to the business, but the business, at least I don't believe, and maybe they would say otherwise, but it wasn't forced on them. I mean, only Adam really at one point worked in the business, and at 15 or 16 he was actually running one of our stores
Okay.
as a relief manager. But Daniel and Michael, they did their own thing. They went to great schools. They had great jobs, and there was never, when people would say to me, wasn't it your dream to have all of your kids in the business with you? My answer would be, honestly, no.
Love
I
it.
never, I don't ever think I thought about that. I first of all, they weren't living in Michigan at the time. They were in New York and Chicago, and I thought, okay, well, they'll never be back here. And then one by one, the beauty and wonder that really is Michigan, and it brought them back as a great place to be. Great, having just come from Italy, all I can say is it's great to be back in Michigan. Just great to be back here. But I just think they were taught respect for other people, and fortunately, none of them fell in with the wrong crowd, which as we know can happen as teenagers. And I'm proud to say they're good people. They and I think that's I don't know what else is the secret, but talking and I'll say that I virtually never missed any of their school events. Was around for breakfast, around for dinner. We had family vacations together. Nothing was perfect, but it was pretty good.
Yeah, I listen, I told you I was looking forward to having this time. I've got a few other things I wanted to talk to you about, but I'm going to honor your time and I think this is a perfect point to stop. I would love for you to come back someday and do this all over again because I think there's so much more information I'd love to glean from you. I could go on for another hour very easily.
Well, me too.
Your time with me lived up to my expectations and beyond. So I want to just take a second and thank you so much for coming and sitting down with me and being willing to share your time and your vast experience and success in this industry. It humbles me that you're willing to come and share some time.
Well, my pleasure. And look, I appreciate what you're doing, and I think the venture you're in now is terrific. And personally, I want to know more about that.
Well, I'm
So,
looking forward to sitting down. We're going to have an offline conversation here soon and catch up a little bit on that front because I'd love to talk more to you about that. But just again, wanted to say congrats on all the success. It's certainly well deserved getting to know you a little bit better, which is my favorite part of the podcast, by the way. Just getting to know people's stories and getting to know them a little better. As I said, from knowing Michael, I had a pretty good idea of what you're about and what I was going to think when this was over. And you certainly haven't changed that opinion at all. Listen, somebody wants to sell a facility in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and they're looking for a buyer who's going to take care of their facility. How do they get a hold of the Pogoda companies and make sure that they're able to have a conversation with you guys?
well, probably the best thing would be to contact Michael 248-877-3901, or go to our website, which we're actually rebranding at this point. But for the moment, it's pogodaco.com, pagodaco.com. Got to spell pagoda right, people. Always spell it with an A.
I've done it many times and gotten emails bounce back.
I'll tell you just one last funny thing is that my dad was an attorney in Brooklyn, and in the yellow pages and the white pages, we had it spelled both ways.
Nice.
Because
That's
people
great.
would misspell it, so he wanted to make sure. So we always had two listings. It was spelled both ways.
Smart. I love it. Listen, that's it for this week's episode of Stories Behind the Door. He is Maurice Pogoda, founder, owner, president, genuinely amazing individual of the Pogoda Companies. Can't thank you enough for joining me. I'm Thaddeus Campbell. I look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Thaddeus, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
What a pleasure, Maurice, and look forward to talking again soon.
Same here. Bye-bye.